Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles, and I would like to thank all of you that joined us for our special patron only, special guest hosted Mau Mau Hour last night with the Norman Finkelstein. I was hoping for more calls. I figured we'd get more calls. The first time we had Norm on the show was a Saturday when we had the original, much larger Saturday crew. And boy, was that an experience. It's still to date our most popular episode. So I just figured the phone would ring, but it did not. But faithful show caller Strom McCallum called in. Strom called. Be like Strom. Pay a lot of money for this phone service. That being said, if you guys want to be a part of these call-in shows, get access to the champagne room, we'll be calling in tonight. There's only one way to do it. Become a patron. And now there is a discount where you can pay for the whole year for $30. Patreon.com/Bitter Lake Presents. And also, if you're new to the show, please hit like, please hit subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notifications bell as we are constantly adding new programming to the channel at all times. Also, tomorrow night, doing movie night, Free State of Jones. We'll be doing it at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And good friend, TIR crew member Jeremy Salmon will be setting it up for the Discord. So the only way you'll be able to watch is become a patron. So if you want to watch movies with us, we comment afterwards. Patreon.com/Bitter Lake Presents. So I know some of you, we probably would have more people here normally, but the draft is on. I think Ben Burgess is doing this real big debate breakdown between Vivek Cheber and Richard Wolff or somebody else. Vivek Cheber, can't remember off the top of my head, but I saw it and I was like, damn it, Ben. Always trying to interfere with my shit. And in honor of the NFL draft, I wore my Broncos stuff, even though we don't have a pick in the first round. Never know. But as people are either knee deep in the NFL draft or NBA playoff basketball or Joe Biden's aid package to the Ukraine, there is something I read this morning that caught my eye that I don't see too many people talking about. There's a story I came across today about constantly embattled San Francisco District Attorney Chesa Boudin. Chesa Boudin is an open socialist who was riding a bit of a pink wave of local and federal elections when he got into office a few years ago in San Francisco. With the fall of Bernie came a realization that liberal democracy can be reformed from within. The success of the AOC campaign and Justice Democrats was the bellwether for a resurgent left attempting an inside strategy. But the downfall of that strategy is without a strong left institutions, your strategy is kind of doomed to fail. And Chesa Boudin finds himself in a situation where he is constantly fighting not just a right-wing push to get him out of office, but also a push from establishment Democrats. Have you guys been hearing about this? Let me bring in my co-hosts and ask them if they've been hearing about this. He's back, and it's very late where he is. Please welcome everyone's favorite professor at Missouri State University, Mean Djene Bajalan.
Greetings, everybody. Hello, Jason. I hope you're doing well. I have not been following that news. I've been busy following the latest British political scandals. Somebody was watching porno in the House of Commons, and
that's
he
a scandal?
Well,
It's
he
just
got.
not
I think
Thursday?
it's just a normal day in Parliament, I guess. I guess someone just whipped out their phone and decided to. I don't know what's the porno channels these days. is it the Brazzers or something like that, just in the House of Commons, and apparently he got dobbed in by two of his fellow Conservative MPs, because of course it was a Conservative doing that. So that's the latest
Well, hold on,
ridiculousness.
hold on. Let's bring in our favorite operative of the Death Star. You guys have missed him. He's very busy, late, so it's hard to get him on the show more. You might be seeing more of him lately. He is the one and only Deep State Kuba.
Hello, everyone. Just to get it out of the way, one reason why I'm busy is that they have me infiltrating like a Jedi operation that's counterfeiting electric scooter permits on Tatooine. It's like a major violation. There's all these unregistered plasma scooters like everywhere. It's a traffic hazard. I mean, it's a choking hazard. It would be hard for
And
anyone
they
to
don't
like
meet
get it in their mouth.
environmental standards.
Exactly. They go in for the smog test. They totally blow them, but no, here's a Jedi, and it's like beep beep beep. This is street legal, so I'm here to bust it up, and that's why I've got this. Now that I'm inside the Jedi operation, every video window looks like this. It's just like a chorus of angels and heavenly music. It's
It
really
looks like
annoying.
you do have light coming from your hands, Kuba. It looks like the
That's
power
Jedi.
of God
Yeah,
is
exactly. No,
flowing through you.
It's like the shittiest force trick, right? Like it's what you learn on day one, and 99% of people don't progress beyond it. And it's like, oh look, I'm a Jedi. I can emanate the glow of a dying iPhone, and maybe I can read your counterfeit plasma scooter permit by it, right? Really annoying. Really annoying.
Well, I want to get your guys's really quick, and the chat as well. I want to get you guys a quick take on this. Jason Boudin kind of sort of, has a vision of turning the DA's office ostensibly into a radical arm of the public defender's office. While sounding radical, it definitely goes against political orthodoxy. And since this is not a federal campaign, many of the voices in progressive media haven't really chose to cover this story. I believe Chase is probably the only safe socialist DA in the nation. Do you know of any other socialist DAs, Djene or Kuba?
Not that I know of.
There's Pittsburgh,
Krasner,
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, there's Krasner.
He's not.
But Krasner was sort of one of the first explicitly anti-carceral, not aligned lockstep with the police unions, DAs to be elected, which is the only reason I bring him up. But that's the best I can do.
Yeah, and Chase isn't a Krasner, right? There's definitely been the arrests haven't necessarily gone down, but he definitely has a restorative justice platform. And I don't know if that restorative justice platform is built to succeed without true left institutions and true left movements. Because what happens is that there's kind of this fallout, which is crime still exists. I was just recently in San Francisco with my young son, and we went to an area that I used to live in, and Kuba knows the Bay Area as he lived there for a time. We stayed in the Tenderloin.
The Tenderloin. I remember hanging out there with Jack London. That guy can drink. He won't shut up about Alaska, but like he knows where to take you. Best opium joints in Chinatown.
I will say this: a lot of venues and cool places that were there when you were back in the Bay Area are gone, and I was there when it was super homelessy, and that hasn't changed, and it's definitely gotten worse. And that is becoming the main concern in his recall election. June 7th, Chase Boudin is facing a recall.
I'm not surprised, because I think the homeless issue in California. As more and more people are turfed out of their homes, people go to encampments. I think a lot of people just don't want to have to deal with that kind of issue, and they want it cleaned up and tidied away. I remember the South Park episode where they got a Whole Foods, they abolished the police, and then all the homeless people turned up, and they brought the police back to get rid of the homeless people because fundamentally the question of police reform and broader structural economic reforms are so intertwined. You can't simply in a political sense sustain the kind of radical legal reform and restorative justice if you're in a context where you have a growing homeless problem, a rise in petty crime, all these kind of things, because middle class people will turn out and they'll be like quality
But
of life.
a lot of this funding and support for these recall elections, as San Francisco just got another recall election for 3 of the more progressive school board members, are coming from outside of the state.
Well, I'd also point out, like, there's a substantial constituency wherever you go that is middle class enough, secure enough that they're not primarily worried about meeting their needs, and they're more concerned about being able to kind of enjoy themselves or feel secure with what they have. And San Francisco, the Bay Area, these aren't poor places. They're places where there's a lot of money, and not all of it is Google billionaires. It's not Sao Paulo. There's a grotesque inequality, but there's also a substantial population of very well educated people who are doing well economically and want to feel like this city is working for them, so they can do as well as they feel, they can live as well as they feel that they're doing. They've succeeded, they've done what they're supposed to, and they just want to be left alone to enjoy the spoils. And things like crime or degraded public education get in the way of that. And they don't have much of an additional ideology beyond, like, we're successful PMC and we want to be able to pass that on to our kids and to kind of just like enjoy our treats. And when there's too much experimentation, unsuccessful experimentation in local municipal policy, they revert to, and they'll do this against a right-wing incumbent as well. They'll pull away from reformism towards what they consider to be sort of like neutral good governance politicians.
I agree. And I think we have to remember that San Francisco historically for the last 50 years has not had a conservative district attorney. Say what you want about Kamala Harris. There's not been any conservative district attorneys in San Francisco for like 50 years. So whoever would replace Chesa Boudin probably wouldn't have the same restorative justice mindset. Maybe they'd speak the feel your pain language of restorative justice and still sentence people.
Well, that's what it comes down to, really, isn't it? Because the kind of middle class base that Kuba's talking about in San Francisco is at least theoretically wedded to issues of social justice, provided those issues of social justice don't have any tangible cost to them. So, sticking a yard sign up or, being not being like overtly racist, those are low cost ways for these people to, feel that they're good people. And if they have someone that they feel understands the issues whether that person is giving harsh sentences or adopting policies that are, let's just say problematic from
I
a
mean,
left
Kamala
perspective.
Harris was a rock star DA in San
Yeah.
Francisco, and that
You
pretty
can
much
be
says
a
it all.
conservative DA in San Francisco. You just have
As
to
long as you
talk
don't call yourself
woke.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you just have to talk in a particular way. Just as in the Midwest, you can be a radical, but you have to talk in sort of the vocabulary of Christianity. So these people are opportunists and they conform to the social cultural milieu and they adopt the language that is necessary for them to advance their positions because their base at the end of the day, in terms of its concrete material interest, is not that different from middle classes in other parts of the country.
Oh, every major metropolitan city, Seattle, San Francisco, Honolulu, Houston, Austin, there's Chicago, tons of problems with housing because of the way we look at housing, the punitive way in which we look at uh, government housing. And that's a huge
Yeah.
jobs are a huge problem. But when we look at places like San Francisco, which is supposed to be some sort of liberal bastion, and it is to a certain extent, what's sad to me is when you start to get these quote unquote progressives in office, there's a reason why I made the video. I say we don't need another hero. We look at these people as the saviors for these problems. They said they were going to fix them in their campaign speech. They're going to fix them. And that's not how this stuff works. You have to have a plan. And when you're as far left as someone like Chesa, and you really want to have a restorative justice outlook, that's hard to do and have it work because you have so many unhoused. And then the petty crime problem it becomes an issue for a lot of people. Look, I'm not saying I'm magical. I'm not saying I know how to speak to the streets, but my son and I walked all over San Francisco. I walked his little beige behind. I didn't even realize I walked this far, Djene. 12 miles. I didn't carry him. No stroller. We walked 12 miles. Watch.
So you're just bragging about your genetic material.
No, I'm saying that we walked
Noted.
around the TL and like the Japantown area and downtown, and he had a ball, and no one messed with us. No one asked us for spare change. If anything, people definitely stopped and talked to him, and he got.
Some of us have flat feet, Jason.
I have
Some of
flat
us
feet.
didn't ask for them.
I was born with flat feet, so. But the problem is it's so apparent that even this child that doesn't get out much, even his eyes would get bugged out of his head seeing all these people living on the street.
I mean, that's
And
what happens when you have
ahead.
when you have when you have social decay, when you
Mhm.
have these big structural problems. Changing the political superstructure and reordering things, it's not that it doesn't make a difference, but it doesn't make a big enough difference to change the course of the boat, and the political support for that experimentation, even if it might yield positive results in the long term, is extremely fragile. And I think more broadly, we're living in an era where we've had a lot of mobilization to change the justice system in America, but we're seeing that support fade away with at least the perception that there is a major crime wave taking place. And
And
that perception is reinforced by rises in petty crime, which which basically is a quality of life issue for many people. Um, and I think that's the fundamental problem that this is why I think justice and police reform, if you want to get into Marxist terminology, is petty bourgeois idealism,
Mhm.
because it's a desire to hive off a particular problem and solve that problem in isolation from the huge structural problems that bring about a situation where you have petty crime, increasing homelessness, and the social dysfunction that is associated with those problems. Yeah,
And
I'm not saying a huge public works program would solve every problem. I'm not saying if you gave every homeless person a house that would solve all their problems.
Exactly.
But but doing big projects which would get people housed and employed and medical treatment when they need it, that
But
that would
but the
drain the
project
and
swamp.
is
and
contained.
please.
Kuba, go ahead. I'm sorry. I cut
So
you.
I'd point out that the purpose of these reform projects is to change social behavior, and you change social behavior by changing the structures, the incentives, the punitiveness, the experience of individuals in their kind of like civic municipal life. But the people going in at the beginning of a reform project have been shaped by the generations or the decades of reactionary governance. And even if the reactionary governance wasn't full spectrum and it's only in a few areas, still that creates legacies, that creates significant impact, that's socialized people to behave in certain ways and to respond to changes in incentives and changes in opportunities in certain ways. Like the whole uh, efficiency, entrepreneurial, profit motivated gain from capitalism is supposed to come from basically unleashed individual level opportunism, that everybody who sees a play takes the play and then we're all better off. But you can't be surprised that if that's the mentality you're trying to inculcate in a culture, some people take it in non-legal directions. I mean, Travis Kalanick, the entire structure, the entire profit opportunity of Uber had to do with disregarding regulations and ignoring
Mhm.
the law, in the same way that a pickpocket disregards regulations and ignores the law when they reappropriate the property that you've brought out in public. Um, and that is a vulnerability whenever you're shifting to a more humane system, because people that have been made hard by the previous administration are still there and they're still thinking with a ruthless, opportunistic logic. It
And you
takes
don't have
time
the
to
whole
shift.
superstructure, right? We don't have an entire superstructure set up to take these people in, like Gene is talking about. There is no
Yes,
jobs work
absolutely.
program. There's no mayor
Absolutely.
that's going to be supportive of you. Let's keep
And no
one.
one
Go ahead.
and no one believes that this is going to stay the same, that these rules
Exactly.
are going to stick around. You've got your window. It's opened up. Now you got to get as much as you can, because it's going to close and then you'll be on your own again. And then it'll
That's why
be
I think moments like this are very important, because I really do believe that the Chases of the world rode a bit of I call it a bit of a pink wave post Sanders, because there was a kind of an awakening, if you will, of the idea of public goods governance, the idea that big government may be the solution, the idea that maybe some sort of democratic socialism may,
there might be a
mitigate,
payoff.
right? It may mitigate some of the harm that capitalism has brought onto us, and neoliberalism just ain't working. But there is no structure. It's not going to be one person in a very almost titular role. The DA office trying to transform the district attorney, who is the top cop, and make it an extension of the public defender's office for the most part, is kind of sort of what he's trying to do.
Well,
It's
it's funny
beyond
because
comprehension for most people.
the and it's also pushing against the very adversarial model of American Anglo-Saxon legal structure.
Mhm.
It shouldn't be the prosecutor's job to worry in theory, in an Anglo-Saxon legal structure. It shouldn't be a prosecutor's job to worry about social fallout from their crimes. No, they get convictions against offenders. That's their role. The public defender is there to, similarly, the public defender isn't there to protect you from their clients. They're there to protect their clients from the system. And in theory, there should be some other agency, some social services apparatus or structure that's municipal or state or federal that would be the one that worries about social determinants of crime, the public safety, those kinds of things, rehabilitation, um, addiction, and substance, the control of like narcotics and vice and all of these other aspects. But we're living in a system where some organs of public policy are bloated, overfunded, overused, overmuscled, while others are almost entirely absent. And trying to change that system, you can either be a powerless person in the right role, like trying to do Medicare for all through the Department of Health and Human Services, right? In theory, that's where you should be if you want to do public health reform. In practice, you have no authority to do any of the things you need to do. Or you go for a highly powerful, concentrated, highly resourced position that's inappropriate for the project that you're doing because it was intended, like the DA's office, for a very different, very repressive function. And we've all talked about in different ways how you need to re-engineer the entire institutional arrangement if you're going to get any coherent progress, because different agencies should be working together. But instead, you have the wrong institutional architecture to begin with, and then the two-party system has different elements of that mal-designed institutional structure working against each other to prevent any refinement or improvement in them. It's pathological.
And the Chronicle just had a kind of a scathing takedown of the hotels. And I sent a message out to Randy Shaw, frequent guest on the show, long time housing advocate, who's been still working at it in his latter 60s. He's coming on May 17th, and we're going to have a long talk about CHESA, as Randy has written extensively about CHESA. And we're also going to be talking about the hotels in general and housing, and of course, gentrification. So look forward to that show on May 17th, I believe it is, with Randy Shaw. That being said, sorry we went so deep into that conversation.
And not sorry. I mean, it was pretty good. Sorry, but I mean,
sorry, not sorry.
Yeah.
My goal is to be 5 minutes in and out, but that didn't happen.
You got to stop being so interesting.
Right. That didn't sound right. Does it sound pretty? Okay.
5 minutes in and out. Is that why you have so many offspring?
Yeah.
Sexual intercourse.
They don't call him the spackler for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
The Bay Area spackler.
I mean, wasn't he a serial killer?
Spackler.
Don't do like region plus.
Just spackling all over Mexico.
Bay Area spackler.
Now that 5
too similar to Boston Strangler. Right?
Story of my life right now. You're gonna have to write a whole. Thank you. Did you hear that? She said she'll have it to me in 5 minutes. Enough of that. Djene Bajalan, tell me more about people jerking off in the House of Commons.
No, I just read in the newspaper this morning with my usual disgust at what's going on in Britain, and yeah, it was there was a case of somebody was caught watching pornography in the House of Commons, which I guess that's what we pay them for. I don't know, but it really blows my mind that somebody thought it would be appropriate to watch that kind of not safe for work products.
Yeah, I mean, what is this, Italy, where the viewing porn in Parliament scandal happened like a year ago and wasn't a scandal? It was just like everyone like, oh, they put the wrong channel up. That's fine.
Oops. Well, in
Yeah,
Britain,
it was anime too. It was apparently it was like a fan fiction, like a sort of the erotic parody of some anime series. Um,
don't pretend you
and
don't know.
Yeah, I clearly have not researched this. I didn't immediately look up all of the details. I
But
did.
what I
I
really
was
have
not the
been,
original poster of the video clip.
what I've
Um,
really been following, which seems to be quite on the down low, is the tensions raising over the Solomon Islands. Have you been following that, Kuba?
only in the most oblique way possible, which is that a friend of mine, actually Elise Harala, who I interviewed for the show, she got an interview request from a Polish journalist and
Hmm.
asked me, like, basically, is he a Nazi? Right? Like, is he one of the law and justice whack jobs who's going to make for an uncomfortable interview experience? So I looked him up, and he's fine. He's fine. He's just like a PMC radlib. And his Twitter was full of China, Solomon Islands, like reactions and analysis and breaking news. So fill me in, right? Like on what the world outside of Warsaw is thinking.
Well, it just seems there's been the United States has had some very strong words about the potential of the Chinese government um, having a military base in the Solomon Islands. Australia, in particular, is pretty upset and
Yeah.
concerned about their security interests, as the Solomon Islands is 2,000 miles away from them. Now, that sounds a long way, but obviously Australia is a giant island, so they have a traditional, let's just say, security sphere in the Pacific. They have a long colonial history. So China, moving into that area, obviously is a concern to them. And there's been talk of military action. There's been talk of, preempting what the Solomon Islands government wants to do with China, which is a kind of interesting counterpoint to what's going on in Ukraine as well. As it seems, with all the events that are going on and with the world, you know, distracted with what's going on in the Ukraine, we're seeing, I think, a lot of people, a lot of countries moving and counter moving as there seems to be a real attempt to reorder the security apparatus uh, of the world, a redivision effort, as
Repartition.
a repartition of spheres of influence. And I think on one side, obviously, I think when people look at it from North America and from the Western perspective, um, you have on one side you have, let's say, liberals and left liberals who are, rally behind their government's hard lines against China and Russia in a uncritical way. There's a lot of discourse that relates to the Second World War. Russia and China are doing a Ribbentrop
They're doing a
Molotov.
Munich.
They're doing a Munich. They're doing all kinds of things, but of course, the Solomon Islands is just a beautiful expose of the hypocrisy when it comes to the Ukraine. Now, let me be clear. My position has always been, Russia escalated this war. Uh, Russia had, we can look at things in a complicated way. Even when I was at high school, when we were learning about the causes of World War II, one of the things that we were taught was, the British and the French were very mean to Germany after the war, and that helped facilitate the rise of Hitler. That, of course, doesn't mean that Hitler was justified or anything like that. And we can hold two thoughts in our mind that Russia uh, is in some sense a Frankenstein created by policies adopted by the West in the 90s and the 2000s without buying into the Russian line that they're launching a war of liberation uh, in Ukraine. But of course, while this is taking place, we're seeing a kind of reverse situation where a sovereign country wants to have relations with China, and it is being vetoed by the imperial powers of the region, the United States, of course, but also Australia, which is a kind of subcontractor of the United States in the South Pacific. And I
Yeah.
thought that was this is a really concerning and interesting escalation that we're seeing at the moment, because when I think of it in a macro sense, you know, the Western alliance systems are not, don't have any principled stand against countries bullying other countries. It's all about which side of the team you're on. Look at Turkey and its actions over the last decade. They got away with a lot of things that would have got other countries into deep trouble because they were in NATO. And if Russia was in NATO, we may still have a conflict in the Ukraine for another set of reasons, perhaps. But surely the West would not be as bothered about it. But it seems definitely a lot of countries are moving and pushing the boundaries. And, Kuba, I'm sure you've been noticing there's a lot of heavy rhetoric about nuclear warfare, both in the American press and in Russia. And this is all very dangerous because it seems more and more we're seeing potential flashpoints emerge.
Do you think nuclear warfare? Let me ask you, because Norm brought up nuclear warfare, and then, no, he always brings up the doomsday clock. Do you feel that nuclear warfare is on the table right now? You two, I want to get you two's perspective. Use guys, or do you
You
think this?
guys, Yin's.
Or do you think,
I
because a
want
lot
to
of
get
people that are
Yin's
talking about nuclear
perspective.
war come from an era when that was a big fear, and there's so much resurgence of Cold War era propaganda, especially with Russia right now. Do you feel that nuclear war is really on the table?
So, I think that there's a, I think that there's a substantial risk, not because of Putin being particularly evil or this being part of some nefarious plan. Major devastating conflicts don't need to have that kind of deliberate spark or deliberate source. The danger comes from the fact that if Russia can't beat Ukraine militarily, and it looks like that type of shock and awe victory that the United States enjoyed over the Iraqi state in 2003 or Afghanistan before that is just not available for Russia against a country like Ukraine. Then the only bulwark, the only security bulwark that they have left is their nuclear arsenal. And the American perspective on the nuclear arsenal, if I had to distill it, and this might be an oversimplification, but basically is we have nukes, you have nukes, they cancel each other out. So it's like nobody has nukes. And whatever we can do in a sub-nuclear way is fair play. And if we can beat you in a sub-nuclear confrontation, now that you're in it with Ukraine, not something that we instigated, but now that you're in it, if we can pull on Afghanistan on you using the Ukraine, or if we can get some other non-nuclear edge that forces you to back down, to surrender, then you can't legitimately use nuclear weapons. That, for some reason, breaks the rules. That, if I had to describe the subconscious programming of the American political class around nuclear weapons, it would be that. But the Russian position has always been, and this was true of the Soviet Union as well, no, the nuclear weapons are how we prevent our need to surrender. And if it comes down to surrender or use nuclear weapons, well, that's what we have the nuclear weapons for. So I think that the weakness that Russia has shown makes nuclear war, unfortunately, much more likely, because it will be taken as an opportunity for escalation, which might pyramid very quickly, might end up very quickly at a point where the only options available for Putin are surrender or nuclear weapons.
And if you want to think of a historical parallel in this, um, obviously it could be looked at as reductive if looked in isolation. But one of the theories about the origins of the First World War relates to railway timetables and the way that mobilization plans for the war, once set in motion, made the conflict inevitable, because you can't just, move all the trains and then not move all the trains. You're either going or you're not going. So there was this theory of war by timetable. Of course, there's a whole economic, political, and cultural underpinning that got us to the point where we had mobilization, which became unstoppable and inevitable once underway. But that's the danger, really, I think, we face when we look at nuclear war. We'll get into a situation where, you know there's a military track and a military decision that is made that pushes us into a nuclear conflict,
Yep.
in an analogous way to how the requirements of railway mobilization basically hastened the First World War.
And I think that's absolutely right. And to combine that with what JB is saying in the super chat, we've always had these weapons and we've always had these fundamental security contradictions in our international system. But the conflict in Ukraine, it's like you always had the bunker, you always had the launch system, but somebody has put the key in. It hasn't been turned, it hasn't been unlocked, but one more necessary step towards that outcome has taken place. And what would be ideal, what would be best, would be if we could back away from that. If somebody would just take out the goddamn key and reset it. But that apparatus has been put into play, and each step gets you to another step that needs to happen, right? Then you have to unlock the key, then you have to get authorization, then you have to put in the codes. But it is not good whenever any of those lines are crossed, especially if it's done in a way that you can't uncross them easily. You can't uninvade Ukraine. You can't unsupport Zelensky. You can't unsend weapons. You can't unthreaten war, unthreaten nuclear war.
And what the Solomon Islands is telling us is that countries, the United States is, I think definitely in reaction to this new state of affairs that's emerged in Ukraine, there is an incentive for the United States to take harder lines at other parts of the world in order to avoid what they see as a security defeat. And so you end up with a situation where we've had long running tensions with China, military tensions, which are exacerbated by China's now extremely important economic position in the world. And also, if China's understandable from a great power perspective, desire to create its own sphere of influence in a region which had previously been dominated by the United States. So, you know, a lot of discourse in America relating to international relations takes a moralistic tone. We see it with Ukraine. We see it, and we see it on both sides. We see it either with the people saying, how can you say that we have to make an agreement or peace with Putin? He did an invasion. It's evil, and that all may be true, but you still have to find some way to avoid the enormous human cost and escalation. And then, of course, the inverse is that everything is driven by the United States, and every other country is purely reactive. But there's a dialectic taking place here, and we're seeing the ramping up of these tensions as in the aftermath of, I wouldn't say absolute American decline, but relative American decline around the world, and new powers seeking, on the same basis as the United States had, to expand and develop their own spheres of influence and deal with what they see as their own legitimate national security concerns. And of course, who gets crushed in the middle of this? It's the small nations and small peoples of the world. One of the reasons I am very skeptical of the multipolar world discourse is that where in certain cases that multipolarity may be advantageous to certain countries and certain peoples, it will still crush other peoples. So you're reordering who's getting crushed, perhaps, but at the same time, you're not fundamentally changing the system. We're just reverting back to a more divided world as opposed to a world where American hegemony was broadly accepted, if not loved.
And one thing that I'd point out too, um, with all this talk about multipolarity, you would think that there would be more independence among the great power actors. Like right now, what you're not seeing is um, any cleavage between the Russia and China, or between Europe and the United States. Any of that separation that would really suggest that things are heating up towards multipolarity. Um, Instead, any cleavage that might be going on between the great powers is really being kept under wraps. And you have these two incipient blocks replicating a bipolar world order where it's really the pair of forces, Sino Russia and transatlantic West, that um, are the focus of everyone's attention in terms of shaping the geostrategy for big and small countries alike.
Also, I wanted you to know, Gene, that the NFL draft started off with a Ukrainian refugee giving a speech of hope and determination. And she ended the speech as she did have a cape. She ended the speech, um, and you could see that she was getting fired up. You could see the adrenaline rush in her eyes because it is very nerve wracking speaking in front of thousands of people. I'm sure you guys have done it numerous times. Gene, his classroom was constantly filled with
It's not
hundreds.
thousands of people in my class, Brenton.
You could have lied and just let me paint that picture so people don't think you're putz, but you wanted to keep it
I
going.
can't lie to you, Jason.
I,
Yeah, I
But no,
mean,
I gave
I
you
mean,
the
like
out.
when
Gene
I gave you the out.
Gene
honest,
only teaches in auditoriums. It's in his
Yeah,
rider.
like his classes are so popular.
Green M&Ms and auditoriums.
but the but on a
But she
human
gave us,
level,
wait, but hold on. She gave a speech, and at the very end of it, you can see her get all fired up. She went, "Long live Ukraine!" We were all like, "What?"
well, on a human level, it is a story of a bigger country bullying a smaller country, and there's a whole lot of people who were just living their lives totally kind of relatively normally 3 4 months ago, who have now been stuck in like a horrible war zone, a brutal war zone, and you have an invading army, and you have when you have invading armies, you have human rights abuses, you have collateral damage, and you have people hardening. The I think the irony, the great irony of Putin's call that his invasion was an anti-Nazi invasion is that the one thing that has certainly strengthened the extreme right in in Ukraine and will strengthen them for a long time to come uh, has been this invasion, and the parallel is what we saw in the Middle East. Radical Islamists like Al Qaeda, ISIS, these groups do not represent the vast majority of people in these societies, but the conflict has given these groups the opportunity to grow and have an outsized influence. The quote that's often given by people about Ukraine is like, well, the far right didn't do very well in elections in the Ukraine, and that may be true, but we're not in a normal political situation anymore. We're in a war situation. And in this situation of war, those groups are going to become armed and empowered. And once they're armed and empowered, they are very difficult to dislodge. One of the biggest
You end up with,
disasters for
even if you do manage to separate the far right forces, far right paramilitaries from quote unquote mainstream politics, you'll end up with Day of the Condor or Years of Lead type situations because that far right violent capability, that competence with weapons, that familiarity with operations, that willingness to kill persists even when you've frustrated its political expression.
and that's the best case scenario.
Mm.
The worst case scenario is you end up with a situation like in Iraq. During the conflict against ISIS, they established the Popular Mobilization Units, which were a Shia militia. And these Shia militias now cannot be dislodged from the political process or the state in Iraq. Even when there's discontent about the rule of militias in Iraq, the broader public is largely powerless to do anything about them. And the second thing is that they do maintain legitimacy because they really did fight against ISIS, which was murdering and killing people. So what I see, the parallel I see in the Ukraine is that we've got ourselves a kind of Middle East type of civil war where we have far right forces on both sides of the conflict. Those Chechens and like Wagner Group and all these far right militias from Russia. You know, their opposition to the Nazis is not. Their opposition to Ukrainian Nazis is not ideological. It's just nationalistic. They would probably have very similar social views about the position of
Yeah,
women
yeah.
and gay rights.
Yeah, it's like Strasserism or bust. It's not necessarily that we've got an issue with, just like there's all of these Islamic Sunni extremist groups that are, we like what we oppose ISIS, but only hashtag not my caliph, right? Like, we
Yeah,
want a
or
slightly
exactly.
different flavor of this extremism.
So what this what I fear is that Ukraine will become a crucible for the militarization of the European far right, and this is
It'll be
extremely
their Spanish Civil War.
yeah.
Really?
Think about all the volunteers, the international, the sort of rightist international, including a bunch of liberals that get in, like our friend Malcolm Nance, right? That get in for opportunistic, NATO approved reasons. You go to Ukraine, you sign up for a brigade. All of a sudden, you have fascist friends. All of a sudden, you've got like Nazis in your feed, and you're fighting for them, right? Even if you're black, Jewish, boy loving, sodomite, trans. I mean, even if, for instance, Stefan Bertram Lee went over there and actually fought with them, they would like him. Why?
Mhm.
Because he's fighting with them, right?
Mhm.
They admire that, and you like them back. I'm not saying Stefan would go, and I'm just saying that even the most extreme person under those conditions will form human bonds with people that they would normally consider to be ideological enemies. And that will often soften the ideological animosity and might create converts. And you're on their turf. They've got home team advantage. You're not converting them to not being Nazis, right? They're chipping away at your instinctive and, when it comes to Nazis, probably unexamined revulsion towards those types of extreme politics. And they're like, that weird, like with a weird Russian accent, it's like, Hitler was actually, he did some pretty cool things. Let us listen to Nazbol punk song. They have best drummer
And
in
people
all of Donbass.
are obviously want to obfuscate the realities of some of these groups. So when you see people, on the, let's say, the anti-imperialist trade, TM crew, cheering for Kadyrov, the leader of the Chechens. The Chechen militia that is being sent, the National Guard that is being sent in there, basically Chechnya is kind of like a military fiefdom, which is run by pure gangsterism and which remains relevant as this kind of force that Putin relies on as kind of a shock troops. And then at the same time, in the West, there's an obfuscation, like in a place like Poland, right? There's an obfuscation of the fact that the people that are being cheered on, some of the groups, not all of them, but some of the groups that are being cheered on, are the ideological heirs to those people who pogromed Poles uh, in Lvov,
Mm-hmm.
in the
All across Galicia and Volhynia.
Well,
And
hold that thought. We are an hour in, and we said we are going to keep this tight. Kuba didn't even get a chance to get into his story. Kuba's got a whole news story. If you want to hear Kuba's news story, if you want to call in and talk about Djene, if you want to say, oh, no, you're all wrong. There's only one way to do it. I'm a patron. Patreon.com/Bitter Lake presents. Gentlemen, I think it's time for a song I wrote for my child and cartoons from my childhood that Djene Bajalan put together oh so beautifully. Thank you guys. I'll see hopefully a lot of you tomorrow night as we do another movie night. Still waiting on the Saturday guest to double triple confirm, because dealing with a lot of these bigger name people, they love just last minute dropping out. But thank you guys. We will see you in the champagne room. We are. You're supposed to say it, Djene.
Out.
Thank you.